Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Danielle VERNA. I'm a project manager for the Prince William Sound Regional Citizens Advisory Council based out of our Valdez office. It's really lovely to be in Cordova. See lots of familiar faces and some new faces. Thanks for being here. Thanks also to those of you online listening in. I'm here this week along with some of my coworkers and some of our board members and committee volunteers because we're hosting our fall board meeting in Cordova on Thursday and Friday, and that's open to the public. You're welcome to attend that. We also have an education event on Wednesday afternoon at the elementary school. So if you've got kids, you can bring them by to that. And then this Tuesday night talk. We just wanted to kind of have this week and share a little bit about what the RCAC does and our mission. I'm really going to be focusing in on our science work because that's my job at the RCAC, is to manage our environmental monitoring programs. And so that's kind of where this talk came from: policy and practice, how Open 90 shapes science in the sound. Open 90, of course, is the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. Piece of legislation signed into law by Congress 35 years ago, but it still really shapes the work that the RCAC and our partners do in Prince William Sound. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about. Just with a show of hands, who was born at the time of the Exxon Valdez oil spill? Okay. Oh, most of it. Who was in Prince William Sound?
What did you say?
Who was in Prince William Sound at the time of the spill? Okay, fewer, but a few.
Oh, you did. You got me.
Yeah, so I mean, this in terms of a historical timeline, 35 years ago, not really that long ago. But in terms of changes since that happened, changes to our culture, our climate, the historical relevancy of past events, that does kind of seem like a long time ago. And at the RCAC, we're very mission driven. So we think a lot about that. Oops. Okay, so just as many of you know, the Exxon Valdez ran aground on Bly Reef early morning, March 24th, 1989. Thank you to Dave Jenka. Your name's done.
Thank you for trying to get the photo.
For taking this photo. He was here and he was boots on the ground. The tanker received permission from the Coast Guard to deviate from the traffic lanes that night to avoid ice that was coming out of Columbia Glacier, and just never went back into the traffic lanes, ran hard aground on Bly Reef, spilling an estimated 11 million gallons of oil. The spill reached 1,300 miles of shoreline, which is about the extent from California to Washington on the West Coast. There was a period immediately after the grounding for about 3 days where there was actually a nice weather window in March, but this response equipment just wasn't ready. A lot of it was buried under snow, and the response just didn't happen quickly. And so, as normally happens that time of year, a big storm came through and blew the oil as far south as Kodiak and the peninsula. And so this region here is now the Exxon Valdez oil spill region, and that is the region that the Prince William Sound RCAC works throughout, although we do largely focus on Prince William Sound itself. So there was a lot of impacts that resulted from this. So kind of some jarring images of oil on the beach, some response in a cove, lots of impacts to wildlife in the shoreline, over 250,000 birds, 3,000 sea otters, 300 harbor seals, lots of fish, etc. were damaged. And so that caused a lot of, obviously, environmental damage, but also it caused a lot of social disruption and social strife. And some of these images kind of get at that. There was a lot of fighting about those who chose to participate in the spill cleanup and receive money from industry versus those who chose not to. And you can see in that picture on the left there, Exxon was paid, but I can't get 1 cent. And on the right here, a photo from the reluctant. Flags are at half mast due to the death of our environment. And so at the RCSC in our science program, we're thinking both about the environmental long-term effects and recovery. A lot has recovered, but also about the social science and how communities responded and continue to adapt post-spill. It's important to point out that the Exxon Valdez oil spill was not the first spill in Prince William Sound. The Valdez Marine Terminal first started exporting oil in 1977, and there were some other smaller spills that had happened in the Sound before 1989. And so community members were already starting to talk and wanted to get together and have some sort of council or representation with industry. And this is sort of a famous quote from Ricky Ott. Some of you may know her. She lived in Cordova at the time. She was a local commercial fisher. And the night before the spill, she was speaking to city council, and she said, it's not a matter of if an accident will occur, but when. And unfortunately, a few hours later, just after midnight, the big one actually happened. So this was sort of the landscape of things at the time. When the spill happened, of course, it was a pretty traumatic incident. On the left there, you can see President and Vice President, President Bush and Vice President Dan Quayle and Secretary of Transportation and the Coast Guard of the Commandant, or the Commandant of the Coast Guard, all hunched over a chart of Prince William Sound. On the right here, this is actually the company calendar for Exxon in March of 1989. The Exxon Valdez was a fairly new ship in the fleet. There was a lot of pride in the ship and an emphasis on safety that unfortunately didn't work out. But yeah, the Exxon Valdez had a capacity of 1.5 million barrels of oil. It's pretty large, actually larger than our current tankers in the fleet. And I just wanted to acknowledge Gary Shiganaka for sourcing both of these images. So the result was the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. It was actually passed by the House and Senate in the fall of '89. There was 2 different versions. They were reconciled and signed into law by President Bush in August of 1990. It was a very historic bipartisan vote. Does anyone know what the vote was? Unanimous. It passed unanimously. Yep. Yeah, really pretty historic at the time and today too. And a lot came out of Open 90. My goal here is not to go through everything that the act did, but really just to focus on how it's steering our science currently. But just a couple of things that Open 90 did in terms of oil spill response. It established the Oil Spill Recovery Institute housed here at the Science Center. It created the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, which sets aside funds for responding to a spill and basically puts some ownership on the responsible party to fund cleanup. It created a requirement for double hull tankers. So the Exxon Valdez had a single hull. So on this photo here, or figure here, oil is immediately on the other side of the hull. Tankers now, thanks to Open 90, have double hull. So there's a void space between the exterior hull and the interior cargo tanks. And that is either empty if the tanker is laden, or it can be filled with ballast water. So there's sort of an extra layer of protection there if there were to be a disruption from the exterior. Open 90 also required dual escort tugs for tankers. I have a photo of that later on. You can see. So laden tankers are now escorted by tugs that can arrest the ship in the event of an incident or loss of power. And what I'm going to focus on is the creation of the Regional Citizens Advisory Councils. There are two in the U.S. They're both here in Alaska, PWSRCAC, or the Cook Inlet RCAC, and the Prince William Sound RCAC. And there are other things. The Sea Life Center was also born out of the incident, and others. There's quite a lot. So Open 90, quote directly from the Act, calls for citizens to foster the long-term partnership of industry, government, and local communities in overseeing compliance with environmental concerns in the operation of crude oil tankers. It's really calling for people from the communities, local citizens, to be involved and have a voice in industry that's happening in our backyard. And it states that only when local citizens are involved in the process will the trust develop that is necessary to change the present system from confrontation to consensus. I would say that still stands today. And so the RCACs were born. This is our board at our last year's fall board meeting, which was in Kodiak. And I think most, if not all of us, will be here this week too. In terms of science, this is the photo I was mentioning with the dual escort tugs and the tanker. I got to take this photo on a herring survey with Scott a couple of years ago. So in terms of science, Open 90 calls for each one of the RCACs to establish a standing committee that will devise and manage a comprehensive program for monitoring the environmental impacts of terminal operation and facilities. And this is pretty important. In carrying out that research, the council is authorized to conduct its own scientific research, which means that we can hire our own experts to look at science that is done by industry, but also to conduct our own science. So just to kind of recap the RCACs, we are federally mandated, so we will exist as long as oil flows through the pipeline and through the dismantlement of the terminal. We have a large board. We've got 20 members. Dave and Robert are both here. They are board members for City of Cordova and CDFU. We've got 16 staff right now, a couple open positions. We have about 34 volunteers sitting on our 5 technical committees. We are annually recertified by the Coast Guard, so we do receive some scrutiny there. Every 3 years, we ask for letters of support. The recertification goes out in the Federal Register, so your entity might have been asked or will be asked to provide a letter. Our funding comes from Alyeska. In addition to our mandates from Open 90, we have a contract with Alyeska that lays out some roles and responsibilities and provides us independent funding. And I guess the last thing and really important is that we are advisors. We provide advice, we provide recommendations. We are not regulators. We don't make demands of industry. We're just here to represent the communities and provide some input and feedback. If you really want to read it, it's section 5002. Okay, so we provide oversight of the Valdez Marine Terminal. This is the terminal on the southern shore of Port Valdez. It's about 1,000-acre facility. Each one of these big circles is a crude oil storage tank. They can each hold 500,000 barrels of oil. Only these tanks on the right here are operational right now. The West Tank Farm is not. The terminal is the terminus of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, which runs 800 miles from the North Slope to Valdez. Right now, I think there's about 450 to 500,000 barrels of oil a day, which is about one tank. During the 80s, during the heyday of oil, it was more closer to like 2 million barrels a day. So we have seen declining throughput through time, but with new development on the slope, we may see some increases in the next few years. So this is a big part of what we do. We have one of our technical committees focuses solely on the operation of the terminal. And then, of course, the tankers themselves. Many of these tankers are U.S. flagged. They're in designated trade or transport of crude oil from Valdez to refineries on the West Coast. These are pretty large commercial vessels, maybe 800 to 1,000 feet long, and they can carry probably close to 1 million barrels of oil. Okay, so it's in terms of our science projects, one of our longest standing projects is called LTEMP, or Long-Term Environmental Monitoring. This is a project that we've had in existence since 1993. And basically the goal of LTEMP is to look at hydrocarbon contamination at sites over time. We have a 30+ year long data set at this point. Over time, our sampling sites have diminished a little bit, at least in terms of the frequency of sampling. But we at least every year we sample at 4 sites in Port Valdez, 2 sites adjacent to the Valdez Marine Terminal, 1 at Gold Creek, which is on the other side of the port, and then the Valdez Small Boat Harbor, which kind of serves as a positive control. And then every 5 years, we go to these sites, which with the red triangles here. You can see it sort of matches the path of the Exxon Valdez oil spill. So these are sites that we go back to year after year to kind of have that long-term record. And they're a mix of oiled and unoiled sites. So we can see that change through time. And this was really designed off of the NOAA Mussel Watch program, which still exists today. They were actually sampling in Alaska last year. We sample 3 different ways for LTEMP. We collect sediment samples adjacent to the terminal and at Gold Creek, which is that control site. We collect our native blue mussels at every one of these sites when we visit them, and that's to look at their tissues and to see if there's any contamination in the tissue. And then the past few years, I think we started in 2016, we've been looking at the water column with these plastic jellyfish looking strips right here. These are called passive sampling devices. And they're very, very sensitive down to parts per trillion. They can measure contamination in the water. And if anybody is into chemistry, we have 32 years of data that's publicly available out there. I'm very grateful to our contractor, Morgan Bender, who's an ecotoxicologist and has the joy of looking through all these data. So just really briefly, I guess it wouldn't be a science talk if I didn't show you some data. But this is a summary of that long-term data set. So first off, looking at sediments from about 93 to 2024, you can see there were some spikes early on in the data set. That purple is at the Valdez Marine Terminal. The gold is at Gold Creek, our control site. By and large, those levels are very, very low. It's very, very clean sediments and low risk to the environment.
You know what caused those spikes?
It could have been acute spill events. I don't know for sure. Particularly in a sediment, there may have been something that caused a disruption and caused a spike.
And Danielle, is that a signature only for North Slope crude, or is it anything that's in the water like diesel or gas?
We are looking for ANS crude, but we can fingerprint, and so we can show the difference between like pyrogenic and petrogenic sources. Yeah. Which is part of the reason why we started sampling at the small boat harbor, because we can see when it's like small boat traffic or a diesel spill or something like that. A pretty similar trend with the mussel tissue. Again, you can see some acute spikes when there have been some spills, but by and large, fairly low contamination levels. And then lastly, this figure here, this is the PSDs, the passive sampling devices in the water. Again, this looks like a big spike, but keep in mind that this is parts per trillion. These are pretty minute amounts. And this big red line is just throughput through time. Again, we've seen declining throughput. What we've started to do in the past few years is some genetics work. So we're doing transcriptomics on the mussels to look and see, you know, if there are contaminants in the water, how is it actually affecting the organism genetically? So that's something we're working on right now. The other thing that we've been doing for a number of years is weather monitoring. This is also an open IND mandate to monitor the wind and weather conditions in Port Valdez and how it would affect a response to an oil spill. So we have 2 weather buoys. You may have noticed one in the parking lot on your way in. That does belong to us. The other one is deployed at the Valdez Marine Terminal. This is just off of Jackson Point. We also have a CTD sensor at the Kelsey Dock in Valdez, and we have 2 weather stations at Cokahinek Bar and Cape St. Elias.
What's a CTD?
Conductivity, temperature, and depth. Thank you. All of the data are publicly available. I have a QR code and a couple of slides if you want to look at it. We upload all of the data to the NOAA Ports website and also to AUS. And the Science Center also has a website. We partner with the Science Center for managing all of these data and for servicing all of the equipment. Thank you, Rob, and the New Wave. Okay. Oh, Rob made the PowerPoint. Here he is out at Cokahinek Bar, setting up our weather station just a few years ago. So, and this weather report I pulled off just this morning. It was blowing 28 out there from east southeast. So it's real-time weather data that you can access, air temperature, humidity, etc. So these are the sites, Cape St. Elias, Cokahinek, and the 2 weather buoys in Port Valdez. Again, one's at the terminal. We had one at the duck flats at the head of Port Valdez. Unfortunately, it went adrift this winter. And so it's here waiting for repairs. And we're probably not going to redeploy it there. We're right now trying to figure out where we might deploy it, possibly adjacent to Naked Island, which would give us a better weather input about what's happening closer to the traffic lanes, but that's still to be determined. So this is the link and a QR code if you want to access any of those weather data there on our website. Another topic that we look at in our science program is oil spill response methods, and particularly chemical dispersants, which are substances that are applied to a floating oil slick to break it up and move that oil from the surface into the water column. Dispersants were used during the Exxon Valdez oil spill. They were trialed. They weren't very successful because the oil had weathered and emulsified by the time that they were used. But they were used very heavily during Deepwater Horizon. And so there's been a ton of research to come out on dispersants in the past 15 years or so. And we have maintained a really extensive data set of all of that literature, also available on our website, should you be interested in that. The RCAC's concern with dispersants over time is that they may not be effective in the very cold waters of Prince William Sound, and also because it tends to be a little bit less saline at times, so we have a lot of freshwater input. And so we're concerned that dispersants may not be effective in our region. And so the RCAC has a position statement on the use of dispersants that we do not support them. We would rather see mechanical recovery used. There's a lot going on right now with changing dispersants regulations and stockpiles in the state of Alaska. I'm not going to go into it, but we are going to have an update at the board meeting on Friday if you're interested in that. We also do some biological monitoring. So we worked with the Science Center again to do marine bird and mammal surveys, I think for the past 5 years. For 4 of those years, the surveys were 3 or 4 of those years, the surveys were done in March. In the past 2 years, the surveys have been in the fall. I think they were just done last week. Yep, last week on the new wave. So this is some of the data that comes out of those surveys. We're particularly interested in the traffic lanes and Port Valdez, and so that's where the transects have been done. That figure on the left, those are the transects. And this is a summary of the March data, if I'm not mistaken, that is on NOAA's environmental response management application. So all of the data that we're collecting, we strive to put in a public place so that it can be accessible by spill responders. We've done a fair amount of invasive species monitoring over the years, really over 25 years now. The RCC got involved in this early on because tankers involved in the TAPS trade were actually exempt from any regulations for managing ballast water. And the RCC thought, why is that? They should be, exchanging their ballast water just as any other commercial ships are in the trade. And so we got pretty involved in the policy and regulation side of things, and also in the monitoring for invasive species. And so we have worked with the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center to do most of that work. It's also one of our opportunities to engage with students. So we have interns in Cordova, Valdez, and Kodiak that do this monitoring with these settlement plates and also trapping for green crab. This photo here I took yesterday. We pulled the plates out of the Cordova Harbor yesterday, and those are all native tunicates. And rest easy. Okay. A couple of years ago, we worked with the Smithsonian to do a pretty broad, comprehensive survey across Prince William Sound for invasive species. They use those plastic PVC settlement plates and they just deployed them at all of these sites all over the Sound. They did find 3 non-native species, 2 crustaceans and a bryozoan. This is our retrieval vessel out at Cannery Creek Hatchery. The settlement plates are a great monitoring tool. The catch is that they have to be on some sort of fixed or floating structure so you can deploy them, hang them off. So we went to hatcheries. Not very many invasive species, marine invasive species in Prince William Sound. That's the takeaway. It's pretty low. We've been pretty well insulated from invasions because of climatic conditions and not a lot of foot traffic, but that is potentially changing under climate change. So here's Prince William Sound, southeast, and further out the chain.
And that's Siona Savigny.
Oh, that is Siona Savignii. Yes, there was one tunicate found in the Cordova Harbor 2 years ago that is non-native, and the Smithsonian was concerned about it potentially being here. I didn't see anything that looked concerning when I was out in the harbor yesterday. Another project we worked on with the Science Center was forage fish surveys. We did this for about 4 years. Again, part of a larger effort to monitor herring. There's a lot of work going on to see how herring have changed and recovered since the spill. But these were aerial surveys that were done by Scott. And this is a summary of that larger data set across the Sound from 2013 to 2022. We're also looking at the crude oil itself. How has the chemistry and its properties changed over time? As fields go offline, new fields come online. There's a blend of oil in the pipeline. Its chemical properties can change, and that can affect mechanical recovery or the effectiveness of dispersants. And so every 5 years, we get a sample of crude from the terminal. We send it off to a lab at Climate Change Canada, and they do a chemical analysis for us. And then we have one of our contractors, Merv Bingus, kind of decipher some of that for us. The takeaway here is that Anna's crude has gotten lighter and less viscous over time. This is viscosity, this is density. So that makes it a little bit easier for mechanical bone recovery. That's a good thing. Merv is going to provide an update to the board on this on Friday as well. And then a project that we've had very recently, which is pretty close to home, is this geographic response strategies. Jeremy Rabita has been leading this in the crowd. GRSs are basically like pre-identified sensitive areas with pre-identified response strategies. So for example, here's Hartney Bay. These are some sensitive areas where we might want to deploy bloom or have a vessel ready if there were to be an incident. And they're meant to be guides. They're not hard and fast. And they, you know, if there were to be an oil spill, it's very dynamic at the time as that happens, conditions change. But GRSs can help serve as a guide, identify those sensitive areas, and they've already kind of been run through with input from trustee agencies and local stakeholders. So there's hundreds of geographic response strategies all over the state. There's about 100 in Prince William Sound, but there are not any on the Cup River Delta. And so we saw this as something that we could work on, that's kind of a hold bill. And so Jeremy has been leading this for the past several months. They had a series of work group meetings with stakeholders from the resource trustee agencies like Fish and Wildlife, NOAA, etc. And also quite a few stakeholders from Cordova itself. These are pretty large meetings that were run by Nuka Research, our contractor. Last week, Jeremy held 2 open houses here in town to kind of get input from local community members. And they also got out to do some site visits. So it's Jeremy. He didn't know his picture was going to be up here, but there he is. With Elise and Taya Thomas, they got out in a bow picker and they did a flyover down to Kayak Island as well. So the outcome of this, ideally, we're going to have 10 new GRSs on the Delta. These 8 markings here are just to kind of split up the area. The GRSs might not match those 8 areas. But we'll have them and we'll share them with the EC and NOAA, and they'll be available should there be an incident on the Delta, but hopefully not. And Jeremy's going to share an update on that at the board meeting on Thursday too, if you really want to get some more details on that. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention was some of our social science work. I mentioned at the beginning that, you know, spills affect both our environment, but also our communities. And so one of the projects that we led a few years, almost immediately after the spill, was this coping with technological disasters. You might recognize some of the people in this photo. I think this was at the Pioneer in the early 90s. So we contracted with this gentleman here. This is Dr. Steve Baku. He was a social scientist from
University of South Alabama, I think.
University of South Alabama. Thank you. I knew it was somewhere in the South. And he came to Cordova and he said, I know this community is hurting. What are you feeling? What's happening? Tell me about, you know, what you're experiencing as a community. And one of the things to come out of that research and his time here was this guide. It's pretty brief. It's meant to be picked up and read in a short amount of time if there was an incident, or ideally beforehand. Just to acknowledge the human impacts of oil spills and technological disasters. There's a number of appendices to the guidebook. The one that we've been working on most recently is our peer listener manual. This is basically a pretty brief manual that's meant to teach active listening skills, how to be a good neighbor, how to be a good community member, how to be an active listener. We have really heavily revised this manual recently with our current understanding of mental health and the value of that. And we're now in the phase of sharing the materials that we produce. So we have an online and print manuals, we have an audio book, we have some audio snippets that can be played on radio. We have some social media posts. They haven't been released yet, but they'll be circulating soon. So if you're interested in peer listening, I think it's a really great resource. It does not have to be in response to an oil spill. If you just want to be a better listener for any reason, I think it's a good option. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, sort of on that social science community train of thought, was the Subsistence Memorial Gathering. We were pretty pleased to partner with the Chugach Regional Resources Commission this past year to co-host this event along with the Alaska Sea Grant. It was in Anchorage, and we brought together community members from throughout the EVOS and Chugach region. And we held a series of panels, both really science-based panels and social science panels. And then we had community roundtables, and we just asked people, we gave them, some question prompts, and we just asked them to share their thoughts, share their ideas. What kind of research do you want to see in the EVOS region going forward? And we got some really positive feedback. We have a report that we wrote that's going to go to the board on Thursday. So I'm going to share an update on Thursday about this project. And hopefully this helps shape the work that we do going forward. So it's a really positive event, I thought. So with all that in mind, it was kind of a run through of some of the things we have going on. I guess I'll also mention that, in addition to the science work, we also spend a lot of time reviewing oil spill contingency plans. We do a lot of outreach. We do a lot of work in the policy sphere. I'm not touching on any of that, but there's a lot to be done, I guess, in this arena. But we also need to think about what comes next. So thinking about science going forward, in this era of a lot of change, we are always looking for input on what sort of projects and what set of science that communities want to see done. We're expecting, new production on the slope, more throughput through the pipeline. We have heard there some refineries on the West Coast are possibly closing down. There's opportunities for more foreign flag tankers to be transiting Prince William Sound waters that may not be as familiar with our spill response systems or our contingency plan requirements. So those are just all things that we are keeping in mind and thinking about going forward. Also acknowledging that as we get further and further away from the spill, younger generations aren't familiar with it. And 35, 40 years ago seems like a long time ago. And so how are we engaging with future generations as we continue to work with the RCAC? And also, as scientists thinking about, do we fund the really basic science questions, or are we looking at applied science questions, and where is our funding and our time best well spent? So those are questions I pose to all of you. If you have answers, please let me know. We are always looking for input. You're welcome to contact me. Here's my email and phone. Yeah, what does environmental monitoring mean to you? And do you have project ideas that we can focus on? Each fall, we welcome project ideas and formal proposals from anyone. That's how we get a lot of our proposal ideas, from the Science Center and other entities. That period has closed for now, but we are always open to ideas, so and your thoughts. And with that, that's it. I'll just leave you a picture of Prince William Sound. I like the visual reminder of what we're all here trying to protect. So with that, thank you.
So I was curious about the foreign tankers. Why do you think there's going to be more that with some of these new places opening up on the North Slope? Or
I think so, yeah, and just taking oil overseas. They can use foreign flag tankers.
And do they have to abide by the same rules? Do they have to have the double holes?
Yes, yeah, that's an international requirement.
Okay.
And they're signed up with somebody's spill response program. Last year, there were, I think, 4, and one of them even delivered North Slope crude to China. It's pretty eye-opening. That Pica one is gonna, when it comes online next year, it's 100% export.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know about Willow, but, yeah, this whole field, I won't go into that, no. I had no.
Yeah, I think the pickup project is slated to start producing oil in early 2026, and that's another 80,000 barrels a day projected. So, and then the Willow project after that.
And a lot of it is just, the US doesn't have enough refineries on the West Coast to handle the oil we're producing. Yeah, I mean, sometimes they come back with oil in the tankers because they can't offload it all on the West Coast.
So why are refineries potentially closing down on the West Coast then?
I don't have a great answer for that. Maybe a capacity issue.
Sounds like they're pretty old and they just don't want to fix them up enough.
There hasn't been a new oil refinery in the United States.
Yeah, I think it's their age and nobody's put the time and money into, and there's no, like in the Gulf of Mexico coast over there, I forget where it is, but where we can pump oil back in for the National Reserve. There's nothing like that on the West Coast to be able to store oil on the West Coast.
There's been some articles in the news lately that the state of California might pay the refineries to stay open.
Yeah.
See how that works out. Yeah, good.
Going back to your invasive species, Caparel and Utica, that's a skeleton shrimp.
Yes.
How many skeleton shrimp species are there in the South?
Yeah.
I'm asking because there were, for the past 2 years, there have been a ton of skeleton shrimp all over our research farm in Sheep Bay.
Oh,
Now I'm very worried that,
it might be Capella and Utica.
yeah, and there are millions of them.
Huh.
Uh,
Yeah, I think there is a native species. I think you probably need some morphological IDs.
I see that.
Okay, yeah, I know. Yeah,
Okay, I'll let you know. Yeah, well, we're going out there tomorrow. I can bring some back too.
okay. Yeah, I have some sample bottles coming on the ferry tonight. Yeah. I'm a scientist. Anyhow.
I have a question about a new factoid I learned at the museum, which was new, and maybe somebody's got information about this, because you probably won't, Danielle, but
Yeah.
I'm Jeremy, I'm RCAC staff, but I'm in the museum. It talks about, there's this big fisherman blockade in '93, if anybody was around for that one. I just have seen the pictures and, but it said that the fishermen held up the Narrows for 3 days, holding back 25% of our national supply of oil, blah, blah, blah. Secretary of Interior Bruce Rabbit releases funds for ExxonMobil settlement to the Prince William Sound Aquaculture Corp and the Science Center specifically for long-term research programs. And this was all just,
Oh,
maybe it's just a little bit off.
Sea
'cause
program.
it's-
Yeah, but it's not like they didn't give us money. No, they
Correct,
gave it went to the
yes.
trustee council.
Right.
And no, and it wasn't even that they gave money to the trustee council, it was to pressure the trustee council to begin a program.
Okay. So I knew that there was already funding in place. It was kind of the question was like, well, geez, that event happened and it led to something. I didn't. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
It allowed the trustee council funds to be competed out rather than just go to the agencies that are the trustees. And so it led to the SEED program, the APEX, and all the research programs since that time.
Well, thanks, everybody.
That's great. At the back, we've got some reading material, but we do have copies of the agenda for the Thursday, Friday board meeting. If any of those topics that Danielle highlighted or anything else might be of interest, the meetings are open to the public, so
you're curious, feel free to grab one of those.
Oh, and we also have a public reception Thursday night at 5:30 at the Reluctant. So
Yeah, come eat food.
come get some firecracker trip.
Oh. Heavy appetizer, we'll call it. Food growth.
Yeah.